Being a cashier gives you a front-row ticket to some of the most bizarre human relationships, but it's not exactly an exciting job. Since I've been working at a Walmart supercenter for more than 2 years, I've witnessed everything. Unpleasant customers, shoplifters, and even someone attempting to use monopoly money to pay for their goods. But I still get chills from what happened one calm Wednesday night. I wish I could forget this kind of story. Few clients were coming in that evening, so it was a slow one. The store had that uncanny quiet that comes in the middle of the night, with the exception of the occasional announcement over the intercom and the buzz of the fluorescent lights, and most of the aisles were deserted. I was counting down the minutes till my shift ended at 11 p.m. I reasoned that I could finally clock out and go home after just a few more clients. She entered at that point. Nothing about her seemed out of the ordinary at first. Her dark hair hung like a curtain over her face, and she was a middle-aged woman. She held a big black pocketbook to her chest as if it were the most valuable item in the world, and she wore a faded gray coat that appeared a bit too big for her. As she walked in, she avoided looking at me, and there was something strange about her. Perhaps it was the slow, methodical pace of her movements, as if she were picking each step carefully. Or perhaps it was the way she seemed to drain the warmth from the atmosphere around her. She weaved in and out of the aisles as she strolled through the store, and I observed. She didn't appear to be browsing, but she also didn't seem to have a goal. She seemed to be looking for someone or anything. She eventually arrived at my register after a wait of roughly 15 minutes. A single red candle, a box of salt, a roll of black thread, and an ancient, tattered-looking book without a title on the cover were among the strangest mix of objects I had ever seen in her cart. I was instantly drawn to the book. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the leather binding was cracked and faded, giving it an old-world appearance. As I began to look through the things, I couldn't help but look at her. Her eyes were sunken, as if she hadn't slept in days, and her face was pale, almost unnaturally so. I tried to break the uneasy pause by saying, "That's quite the collection." She didn't answer. She simply gazed at me without blinking, her eyes vacant. I glanced swiftly at the remainder of her belongings, feeling worried. I hesitated for a moment when I saw that the amount reached to $13.13. I looked at her, partly expecting a response, but all she did was take out an old, crumpled $20 cash from her purse. Her icy fingers touched mine as I gave her the change, and I felt a chill go through me. I forced a smile and replied, "Have a good night." She didn't respond. Without saying another word, she simply picked up her bag and left the store. I was about to close my register a few minutes later when I saw something odd. There was no receipt in the drawer for her purchase. Her receipt was missing, even though I always produce one for each customer. I looked through the register's transaction history, but I couldn't find any evidence of the sale. She appeared to have never been there. Uneasy, I called Tom, my manager, and told him what had transpired. He scowled and recommended that we look at the security footage. I was completely chilled by what we saw on the cameras. I was seen on camera standing at my register scanning products and conversing, but no one was in front of me. There was no wagon, no unusual objects, no woman. I was conversing with nothing. Tom looked at me bewildered. "How are you feeling?" "Perhaps you're simply exhausted." What I was seeing was unbelievable. She had been there, I knew. I had given her change, felt her cold touch, and checked her belongings. However, the cameras were honest. For the remainder of my shift, I couldn't get the woman out of my head. The night felt darker than normal when I eventually drove home after clocking out. Every shadow appeared to shift just out of my line of sight, and the lamps appeared to be dimmer. Desperate for sleep, I fell onto my bed as soon as I arrived home. I saw her face, though, those lifeless eyes staring back at me as soon as I closed my eyes. I made the decision to conduct some research the following morning. I couldn't get rid of the impression that the things she had purchased had significance. The black thread, the crimson candle, and the salt all appeared too particular to be chance. I was frightened by what I discovered. Her purchases matched the components of an ancient ceremony that was intended to call forth spirits or create a portal to the afterlife. Not just any book, but a grimoire, a compilation of spells and incantations, was the one she had been holding. It dawned on me then that she wasn't just an odd client. She was completely different and shouldn't have been there. I tried to tell myself that I was overanalyzing everything and that it was all a coincidence. However, she returned 2 nights later. When I saw her again, she was standing close to the door at the far end of the store, and it was approaching midnight. This time her face was considerably paler than previously, and she wasn't carrying a cart. With my heart racing, I froze. She remained still. She simply stood there and gazed at me. I looked back to see that she had left when I turned to call for Tom. I didn't see her again after that. I had no idea who or what she was. Perhaps she was only in my head, a mental trick from working too many late shifts. Or she might have been worse. All I know is that I will always remember those lifeless eyes, and the way the room seemed to lose its warmth when she was there. I also swear that I can still feel her observing me at times in the middle of the night when the store is silent and the aisles are deserted. It's not as quiet as you might think to work the night shift at Walmart. Even though there are no people in the aisles, the fluorescent lights and the quiet hum of the refrigerators reverberating around the store have an unsettling quality. Until a night in October altered everything, I've always been the kind to brush unusual things off. I discovered that not everything in this world is as it seems that evening. I was put in charge of the seasonal department, and Halloween was just 2 weeks away. The area needed to seem inviting for the surge of holiday customers, according to my manager, Mr. Preston. He handed me a checklist and said, "Alex, make sure the displays are flawless. You are essential to us." As he left, I rolled my eyes. "Of course, boss," I said to myself. Even though I had worked on the seasonal area before, there was always something strange about it. Perhaps it was the decorations, plastic tombstones, rubber bats, and those zombies who scream when you pass them. Perhaps the mannequins were the cause. This year, 3 life-size Halloween mannequins, a witch, a vampire, and a scarecrow, were the focal point of the exhibit. They appeared to be frozen in mid-conversation as they posed together. Unlike ordinary mannequins, their features were painted with rough, almost infantile emotions, and covered in burlap. I detested such things. The first hour went by without incident. I occupied myself with setting up candy buckets and stringing artificial cobwebs. I would occasionally look at the mannequins and almost expect them to move. Naturally, they didn't. I noticed a slight rustling sound behind me at around midnight. When I turned, I saw rows of plastic skeletons and artificial pumpkins, but nothing unusual, which made my heart skip a beat. "Slow down," I warned myself. "It's probably just the air conditioner turning on." The sensation that I was being watched persisted, though. The mannequins became increasingly unnerving as the night wore on. They seemed to be standing closer together than before, but I told myself I was just dreaming. I didn't realize the scarecrow's head had turned until I went to the end of the aisle to get some Halloween lights. Even if it was only a little tilt, it was enough to make me shiver. I said, "Very funny," thinking one of my colleagues was pulling a practical joke. "You can now stop." Nobody responded. I went up to the scarecrow and put its head back in place. Under my fingers, the burlap felt rough and yet warm. One of my coworkers, Mia, arrived to assist at around 1 in the morning. Even though Mia always had a smile on her face, she was uncomfortable tonight. She looked around the aisle and said, "Hey, Alex. Mr. Preston asked me to see how you were doing." I gave a nod. "I'm glad you're here. I'm getting a little scared of this area." She gave a tense laugh. "Those mannequins are really eerie." For around an hour, we collaborated to rearrange shelves and objects. I occasionally saw her looking at the scarecrow, her face tense with anxiety. Eventually, I became aware of an oddity. The witch mannequin had vanished. I tried to maintain a calm tone as I said, "Hey, Mia, have you relocated the witch?" She scowled. No, why? I pointed to the vacant area where the mannequin had been and remarked, "It's gone." Both of us looked down the aisle, but the witch was not there. Mia said, "Perhaps Mr. Preston moved it," but she didn't seem to be persuaded. I nodded, but I knew in my heart that something wasn't right. Shortly after, I was left alone in the aisle while Mia went off to get some goods from the stockroom. The quiet was overwhelming. I froze when I looked back at the screen. Once more, the scarecrow had moved. Its arms were extended this time, seemingly in search of something, or someone. Its painted eyes stared directly at me as its head was cocked upward. My chest constricted. I was unable to breathe or move. The intercom suddenly came alive. "Please come to the stockroom, Mia." "Go to the stockroom, Mia." My walkie-talkie came out. "Hi, Mia. Are you all right?" No answer. I made the decision to look through the stockroom myself. When I passed the electronics section on my way to the back of the store, I noticed it. In the center of the aisle stood the witch mannequin. It had been positioned differently in addition to being moved. Its hands were up, claw-like fingers curled. With my heart thumping in my ears, I slowly retreated. The stockroom was deserted when I got there. Mia was nowhere to be seen. The gentle hum of the overhead lights was the only response I got when I yelled her name. I began to feel more and more dread. There was a terrible problem. In the hopes that Mia had returned, I made the decision to go back to the seasonal section. However, the vampire and scarecrow mannequins were standing next to each other when I got there. Additionally, Mia's name tag was in the scarecrow's extended arms. Panic struck. I reached for my phone and attempted to call Mr. Preston, but the call was unsuccessful. I was so desperate that I rushed to the front of the store with the intention of leaving and calling for assistance. But I froze when I got to the exit. The doors were blocked by the witch mannequin. I could hear straw rustling behind me. I saw the scarecrow lunge at me as I turned around. After that, I don't recall much. It was morning when I awoke and the store was full of customers. Mia was never located. Everyone was questioned by the police, but none had the answers. That day, I gave up. Since then, I haven't returned to Walmart. However, I do occasionally have late-night dreams about those mannequins. Additionally, they are constantly observing me in my dreams. Particularly late at night, there's something about Walmart parking lots that worries me out. Perhaps it's the gloomy lighting, the long lines of cars, or the uncanny quiet broken only by the squeaky wheels of shopping carts. I didn't give it much thought until one evening when my ordinary supermarket run became an unforgettable experience. I have no idea why I'm writing this. Perhaps it serves as a warning to others or a means of processing what happened. One thing is certain, though. I will never again view a parking lot in the same manner. It was one of those cold autumn evenings when the streets are covered in crunchy leaves and the air prickles your skin. I discovered I had nothing in the refrigerator after working a late shift. With a groan, I made the decision to visit the Walmart located a few miles away from my flat. There was a certain calm in the store that made you acutely aware of your surroundings. Milk, bread, eggs, and a frozen pizza were among the necessities I tossed into a basket as I strolled through the aisles. I paid fast and made my way out because I didn't want to stay. The cold hit me more forcefully than I had anticipated as soon as I entered the parking lot. I exhaled in tiny puffs, and the automobiles were covered in lengthy shadows from the streetlights. Since there were less cars there, I parked close to the back. I had been in a hurry and didn't want to go back for a closer spot, so it wasn't the best decision. I saw it halfway to my car, a dark, beaten sedan parked a few rows distant. Even though its headlights were out, I could sense that someone was observing me from within. I dismissed it as paranoia and continued to walk while gripping my keys tightly. I wanted to get to my car as soon as possible. However, the sedan's engine sprang to life as I got closer to my car. A beat skipped in my chest. With its tires crunching over the loose gravel, the automobile moved slowly onward. My instincts told me to get moving, but I froze because my legs felt like lead. the driver's window down just enough for me to glimpse a hand waving at me as the car rolled to a stop a few feet distant. The wave wasn't amicable. It was intentional, slow, and somehow incorrect. Only the outline of a person behind the wheel was visible to me. I was unable to see the driver's face. "Hey," trying to sound bolder than I actually felt, I yelled out. "What are you looking for?" No answer. With its exhaust clouding the cold air, the automobile sat there idle. I almost threw myself into my car as I fumbled with my keys. I started the engine and locked the doors with trembling hands. The vehicle followed me as I backed out of the parking space. It wasn't nuanced. When I moved, the automobile followed me, maintaining a constant distance. As I made my way to the parking lot exit, my stomach lurched, hoping this was some strange coincidence. However, the sedan's headlights flicked on as I turned onto the main road, and it continued to follow me. I inhaled deeply while attempting to maintain my composure. I reassured myself that it was probably nothing. All they are doing is moving in the same way. However, my logical side of the brain didn't believe it. I chose to put them to the test. I turned down a side street that I didn't often use at the next crossing. The sedan came next. My heartbeat accelerated. I took another arbitrary turn, and another, and the automobile followed me all the way. The person behind the wheel wasn't rushing. They made no attempt to pass me or tailgate. They simply hovered, constantly maintaining a sufficient distance to indicate that they were in pursuit. At last, I was unable to handle it any longer. I hoped the lights and cameras would dissuade them when I turned into a gas station. The driver of the vehicle waved at me once more before vanishing down the street as it slowed down. I whispered, "That was weird," and for a little period I laughed shakily as relief washed over me. But at least they're no longer there. After a few minutes of waiting, I left the petrol station and drove home. The streets were still, with eerie pools of light cast on the deserted road by the occasional street lamp. Tired but glad to be home, I pulled into my apartment complex. Except for a few well-known vehicles that belonged to my neighbors, the parking lot was nearly deserted. However, my blood turned to ice as soon as I got out of my car. The identical dark automobile was parked at the far end of the lot, just visible from a street lamp that had burned out. I knew it was the same car even though I couldn't see inside. It was obvious from the marks on the door and the missing hubcap on the back tire. Calling the police was my initial instinct, but what would I say? That a car was parked close to my building after it had followed me? Most likely they would write it off as a coincidence. I rushed inside, checking the windows and closing the door behind me. I told myself that the car would be gone by dawn in an attempt to get over my worry. But a weird sensation overcame me as I sat on the couch, aimlessly browsing through my phone. I had the impression that I was being observed. I took a look out the window. Even with the shades drawn, I could make out a dim shadow moving outside. I slipped over to the window and peered through the blinds, my heart thumping. A man was standing just in front of my flat, under the street lamp. He was tall, with unkempt hair and a thin body. He was looking directly at my window with his hands stuffed in his coat pockets. With shaky hands, I picked up my phone and contacted 911, explaining the scenario. I tried to speak steadily as I said, "There's a man outside my apartment." He just stood there after following me home. The minutes seemed like hours, but the operator reassured me that an officer was on the way. I was terrified to look away from the man, so I observed him through the blinds. He remained motionless and silent. He simply stood and gazed. The parking lot was lighted by the flashing lights of the police as they arrived. However, the man had vanished. They conducted a search and obtained my statement, but they were powerless in the absence of hard proof. I didn't get any sleep that evening. I jumped every time the flat creaked or the wind blew. I discovered something that chilled me to the bone the following morning. There was a note written in sloppy handwriting on my windshield. "See you shortly." A week later, I left that apartment. I still have no idea who he was or what he desired. However, I can't help but get a shiver of terror whenever I see a dark car, wondering if he's still out there, observing. For more than 2 years, I've been employed at Walmart on the night shift. Although it's not a glamorous career, it's a source of income. Just me, a few co-workers, and the strange quiet of a huge store after closing make up the majority of my uninteresting nights. However, everything changed one night. Even writing about it makes me shiver, and I still can't describe what happened. It was a sluggish Tuesday evening in October, a few weeks before to Halloween. Only the night crew was left after the business had closed. That evening I was in charge of replenishing the home goods section, which was located far away from the break room and front registers. Sandra was in charge of the seasonal area near the back, and Marcus, one of my co-workers, was in charge of electronics. Earlier we made a joke about how quiet, almost too quiet, the night felt. Sandra had chuckled uneasily as she continued, "I swear this store is haunted. After midnight, something always seems strange." I dismissed it. I had no belief in ghosts or the paranormal. However, I couldn't help but notice that Walmart had an odd atmosphere at night. The aisles were like unending tunnels, and the fluorescent lights created long shadows. I heard the high-pitched screech of a shopping cart's wheels at around 2 in the morning when I was stacking boxes of towels. Hearing carts at night wasn't out of the ordinary. Occasionally, the cleaning staff would move them while wiping the floors. This sound, however, was distinct. It reverberated like a scream throughout the store and was loud, almost metallic. I stopped and clutched the package in my hands. "Is that you, Marcus?" With a little quiver in my voice, I yelled out. No response. After a moment of waiting, I dismissed it. Perhaps the air conditioning was moving a defective cart, or it was just my imagination. The screeching resumed a few minutes later. It was closer this time. The store was deserted when I left the aisle and turned to look around. The front, next to the registers, appeared to be the source of the sound. "Marcus? Sandra?" I yelled, raising my voice now. No answer as of yet. I decided to look into it because I was so curious. Like nails on a chalkboard, the shrieking became louder as I approached the store's front. Every stride I took made my heart race and my palms were sweating. I froze when I turned the corner by the registers. A shopping cart was in the center of the aisle. We had thrown it out years ago since it was old and rusted. Despite the fact that no one was touching it, one of its bent wheels was gently rotating. Trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I gazed at the trolley. I became aware of the floor underneath it at that point. The path from the cart along the main aisle was damp and dark. I initially believed it to be water, but as I got closer, I noticed a metallic, unpleasant odor. Blood was involved. I almost tripped over my own feet as I staggered back, my stomach churning. "What the devil?" Under my breath, I whispered. "Marcus, Sandra, come on over here." Panic swelling in my chest, I screamed. Footsteps rang out from the rear of the shop and Marcus emerged, his expression irritated. "Dude, what's up with you?" With trembling palms, I gestured toward the cart and the blood path. "Can you see that?" Marcus narrowed his eyes, his face changing from annoyance to perplexity. "What the devil?" The cart gave a loud, deafening shriek before Marcus could continue. When the cart's wheels started to move by themselves, we both leaped back. After rolling slowly at first, it accelerated and made its way directly to the produce area. "Is this a joke of some sort?" Marcus questioned in a faltering voice. "Do I appear to be kidding?" I yelled. Behind us, Sandra showed up with a pallid face. "What's happening? Why are you all shouting?" The cart had now stopped close to the fruit displays, and I gestured to it. When Sandra saw the blood trail, her eyes grew wide. "Is that blood?" she muttered. The cart screamed louder than ever before we could respond. The music, which seemed to be emanating from inside my skull, was nearly intolerable. Sandra let out a scream when the cart started to move once more, turning erratically as though it were alive. It crashed into an apple display, knocking the apples to the ground. "All right, this is no longer amusing," Sandra yelled as she retreated. "This is not what we did," I shouted back. As the cart rolled toward the frozen food aisle, the three of us crouched together and watched in dread. Its wheels spun in place as it abruptly halted. There was silence for a minute. The lights then started to flicker. Something odd about the cart caught my attention as the lights flickered on and off. It appeared as though the metal frame was melting as it warped and bent. Then I noticed a face. It was there, but it was dim, like a reflection in murky water. Its mouth was twisted into a hideous scream, and pale, empty eyes gazed out from the cart. "What on earth is that?" Marcus shouted and drew Sandra and me away. With every flicker of the lights, the face appeared to follow us, its expression becoming more contorted. Sandra's voice wavered as she stated, "We have to leave this place." The cart wasn't finished with us, so we turned and sprinted in the direction of the back exit. It started rolling after us and let out a loud shriek that reverberated throughout the store. As though somebody were pushing it, it moved more quickly than it ought to have. The trail of blood it left behind had thickened and was now leaking like a faucet onto the floor. "Go." I grabbed Sandra's arm and yelled. Avoiding shelves and displays, we ran down the main aisle. Unrelenting, the cart smashed into racks and strewn things all over the place. After storming into the storage area, we slammed the door shut. Marcus attempted to hold the door closed by jamming a metal rod into the doorknob. There was silence for a while. Then, louder and more frantic, the screeching began once more. On the opposite side, the cart repeatedly slammed into the door. "How do we proceed?" Sandra's question was hardly audible above a whisper. I had nothing to say. In an attempt to make sense of the impossibility, my mind was racing. The cart rolled into the storage area when the door finally gave way. With its wheels whirling frantically, it came to a rest in the middle. The face remained, observing us. The reason I grabbed a fire extinguisher and threw it at the cart is beyond me. The cart fell over when the extinguisher clanged loudly. Everything was silent for a while. The wagon then made a last excruciating shriek and fell into a pile of corroded metal as the lights flickered one last time. The following morning, we attempted to explain the situation to the store manager. They didn't believe us, of course. The cart was a damaged, ordinary piece of machinery, and the blood trail was gone. But what I observed is known to me. I still experience a shiver of terror whenever I pass a shopping cart. I swear that I occasionally hear the same shrieking sound reverberating in my head late at night, and I'm wondering if it was truly over, or does the yelling cart remain in the world, anticipating its next victim? Walmart is an odd place after hours. Infinite rows of neatly placed merchandise are harshly glared at by the glaring fluorescent lights that buzz continuously. However, the store feels a little different at night when the aisles are deserted. Every sound, every shuffle of a box, every creak of a shelf feels magnified in the overwhelming silence. In a small, quiet town, I work the night shift at a Walmart supercenter. My name is Ethan. Despite not being my ideal work, it helps me make ends meet. It is my responsibility to stock shelves and clean up after the final customer leaves the store, which closes at 11 p.m. Up until last week, the nights have been routine for the nearly year that I've worked here. I began to notice it at that point. The night was a normal Tuesday. I was given the task of stocking household products in aisle 13. The lengthy hallway is lined with shelves that are piled high with everything from picture frames to candles to plates. Because it's distant from the registers and the break room, it's also one of the quieter areas of the business. I had a weird feeling that someone was observing me as I rolled my cart down the aisle. I dismissed it as paranoid. After all, only my boss, Linda, and two other employees, Maria and Greg, were inside the secured store. I couldn't get rid of the feeling, though. I noticed the darkness at that moment. Just out of my line of sight, it scurried across the far end of the aisle. It happened too fast to be human. At first, I assumed Greg was playing a practical joke on me. It wouldn't be his first time pulling a practical joke during a shift. He had a habit of approaching individuals unexpectedly to frighten them. "Very funny, Greg," I yelled, my voice resonating through the deserted shop. No answer. After getting out of my cart, I went to the end of the aisle and looked around the corner. There was nobody in the next aisle. The next one was the same. The only sound in the store was the distant buzz of the lights. I dismissed it and went back to work. However, the sense of being watched intensified as the night wore on. I was put back in aisle 13 the following evening. After what I had gone through the previous evening, I wasn't really excited about it, but I assumed it was all in my head. I heard it, a faint whisper, about 1 hour into my shift. I initially believed that the person speaking in the next aisle was either Maria or Linda. However, upon closer listening, I discovered that the sound was not emanating from my immediate vicinity. It was so faint that it seemed to be coming from above me. I went cold. I was chilled by the incomprehensible whisper, a low, raspy mumbling. My eyes darted between the shelves and the ceiling as I walked down the aisle, my heart pounding. Nothing. "Hey?" I yelled, my voice faltering. No answer. I attempted to persuade myself that it was either the store's strange acoustics or the air conditioning. But I knew in my heart that it wasn't. I felt tense by the third night. I hadn't shared my experience with anyone. Linda would probably tell me to move on, and Greg would just chuckle. The whispers began almost immediately that night. Just 20 minutes into my shift, I heard them once more. Low, guttural, and eerie. I didn't call out this time. In an attempt to concentrate on my work, I snatched up my cart and pushed it to the next aisle. However, the murmurs trailed after me. Then I noticed it. There was a figure standing motionless at the far end of the aisle. It had a shadowed face and long, gangly limbs, and it was towering, unnaturally tall. Its body was so dark that it nearly blended into the weak light at the aisle's border. I was frozen for a second. I had trouble processing what I was witnessing. "Who's there?" I was able to choke out at last. The figure remained still. At least I believe it was staring at me while it stood there. It had a face devoid of features, a blackness that seemed to absorb the light. With my heart racing, I slowly retreated. I blinked, and the figure vanished. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd witnessed the following day. I thought about giving up, but I had to have the money. I chose to look into it instead. I went to the security office after waiting till my break. As she sipped her coffee, Linda was looking through her phone. "Hi, Linda," I said nonchalantly. "Are the cameras on aisle 13 operational?" She arched an eyebrow. "Why?" I said, attempting to seem casual. "Just curious. The other night I thought I saw something strange." She gave a shrug. "Yes, they are effective. Do you wish to view the video?" I tried not to show my fear by nodding. Linda quickly jumped to my shift after pulling up the tape from the night before. Everything appeared normal at first. I was seen on camera wheeling my cart, roving the aisles and replenishing shelves. Then I noticed it, though. The figure. It briefly appeared in the screen's corner before vanishing once more. "Did you notice that?" I raised my voice and asked. "Look what?" Linda scowled as she spoke. Pointing to the screen, I rewound the video. "That's right there. That dark thing." Linda shook her head and squinted. "Ethan, I don't see anything." I felt sick to my stomach. I made the decision to die that night. I wasn't going to stay to see what it wanted, and whatever was going on in aisle 13 wasn't normal. Like all shifts, this one began with me hyper-aware of every sound and movement flicker. The lights in aisle 13 started to flicker at midnight. I came to a halt, clutching my cart's handle until my knuckles grew white. The murmurs around me were louder now. Then I noticed it. With its incredibly long limbs reaching out toward me, the thing stepped out of the shadows. I felt a cold, oppressive presence encompassing me as its face, or lack thereof, was inches from mine. After that, I don't recall much. I was sleeping in the break room with Linda and Greg standing over me when I woke up. They claimed to have discovered me unconscious and mumbling unintelligibly in aisle 13. That evening, I gave up. To be honest, I don't want to know what I saw in aisle 13. I just know that Walmart isn't a place for the living at night. Stay clear of the shadows and keep your eyes alert if you ever find yourself working the night shift. You can never be sure what could be hiding there. My name is Linda, and what happened to me in 2005 is something I can't shake off. I was 7 months pregnant with my first child when it all started. I thought that the excitement of preparing for motherhood would be all about joy and anticipation, but instead it quickly turned into a strange and terrifying experience. It was an afternoon like any other. Tom, my husband, and I had spent the morning getting the baby's room ready. We just finished putting together the crib, and I had made a list of the items we still needed. We decided to head to Walmart to pick up the remaining baby supplies. It should have been just another trip to the store, but something happened that day that I couldn't explain. We parked in the Walmart lot and the sun was high, the air warm, just a perfect day to get everything we needed. I had no idea that it would turn into a nightmare. As I walked through the automatic sliding doors, I felt a sense of anticipation. It was a big day for me. I was about to become a mother, and that meant buying everything for our baby. I felt a little nervous, but it was the normal anxiety that comes with preparing for a baby. I wanted everything to be perfect. "Let's get started," Tom said with a smile. He was carrying a cart, pushing it as we strolled down the aisles, picking up diapers, baby wipes, and bottles. The store was buzzing with activity, with people rushing about, some with their kids in tow, others shopping for everyday needs. As I moved down the aisles, I picked up soft baby clothes, colorful onesies, and little socks. Every time I reached for an item, I could feel the baby moving inside me. It made me smile, and for a moment, I felt like everything was normal. But then I noticed her. She stood at the end of the aisle. She wasn't doing anything particularly strange, just standing there, her back to me, facing the shelves of baby clothes. But there was something about her. She was tall, thin, and had very pale skin. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and she wore a long coat, which I found odd given the warm weather. Something about the way she stood there so still made me feel uneasy. I shook it off, telling myself that I was probably just being paranoid. Pregnancy hormones can make anyone feel anxious, I thought. But as I grabbed a set of onesies from the shelf, I felt her gaze on me. I turned my head quickly, and sure enough, she was staring at me. Not just glancing, but watching me with an intense focus that made my heart race. I froze. My eyes met hers, and for a moment, it felt like time stopped. She didn't smile, didn't blink, didn't move a muscle. Her gaze was piercing, like she was studying me. I quickly turned my attention back to the baby clothes, trying to pretend like I hadn't seen her. When I looked again, she was still there, standing in the same spot, staring. My pulse quickened. I felt a strange wave of discomfort wash over me. I continued walking down the aisle, hoping she would leave, hoping that I could escape her stare. But no matter where I went, I had the feeling that she was always nearby. I felt like her eyes were glued to me, following my every move. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and my palms began to sweat. Trying to focus on the task at hand, I picked out more clothes for the baby, but I couldn't stop thinking about the woman. Every time I turned around, I felt her presence, and it sent chills down my spine. I decided to move to a different aisle, hoping the change of scenery would make me feel better. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I glanced over my shoulder and saw her again, this time standing at the far end of the aisle. My heart raced and I felt my stomach twist into knots. I quickly picked up the pace, not wanting to be anywhere near her. But as I turned into another aisle, There she was again, standing right in front of me. I didn't know what to do. I had to get away from her. Just then she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost too soft to hear over the noise of the store, but it was clear and direct. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. Her words caught me off guard. I didn't know how to respond. I felt trapped. There was something in her voice that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just a polite question, it was a command, like she was expecting me to answer. "No, thank you," I replied, trying to sound calm. My voice shook slightly and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know why I was so scared. She was just a woman, after all. But she didn't move. She didn't walk away. She just stood there, staring at me. Her eyes never left mine, and her expression remained blank, almost robotic. I could feel my anxiety building, and I took a step back, my mind racing. What was going on? I quickly turned around and hurried down the next aisle, my breath coming faster now. I wanted to get out of the store, but I didn't want to panic in front of everyone. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting her to be right behind me. But when I looked again, she was gone. I sighed in relief, but the feeling of dread didn't disappear. I couldn't stop thinking about her. What was her deal? Why did she make me feel so uncomfortable? I finished my shopping, but the whole time, I felt like someone was watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling. As I walked to the checkout, I looked around, half expecting to see her standing in one of the aisles, waiting for me. When I met Tom at the checkout, I didn't mention the woman. I didn't want to worry him. I tried to convince myself that it was just a weird coincidence, that I was imagining things. After all, pregnant women can get emotional, right? But deep down, I knew it wasn't just my imagination. That night, after we'd unpacked the groceries and settled in for the evening, I told Tom about what happened. I needed to get it off my chest. "Tom, I saw someone today at Walmart. There was this woman, and she kept staring at me. She was so strange." Tom raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, strange?" "She was just standing there, staring at me, and when I looked at her, she didn't look away. It felt like she was watching me on purpose, like she knew me." I shuddered just thinking about it. Tom was quiet for a moment. "I didn't notice anyone, but now that you mention it, I thought I saw someone following us around. She was always just there, in the background. It was like she was waiting for us to leave or something, but I didn't want to say anything and make you more anxious." I felt my heart skip a beat. "You saw her too?" Tom nodded. "I didn't think it was anything, but now that you mention it, yeah, it was odd." I couldn't believe it. Tom, who had been with me the whole time, had noticed the same woman. We both had the same unsettling feeling. But who was she? What did she want? Why did she keep watching me? The next day, I decided I had to go back to Walmart to get a few more items. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that there was nothing to worry about. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. As I walked through the aisles once again, I kept my eyes open, constantly looking over my shoulder. And then, just as I feared, I saw her again. She was standing near the entrance of the store, staring at me. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked past her, trying to act normal. But as I passed by, she whispered in a voice so soft, I almost didn't hear her. "The baby. Your baby is safe, but you need to listen." I froze. My heart thudded in my chest and I felt my blood run cold. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice trembling. But the woman didn't answer. She simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the aisles. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to move. What did she mean by "the baby is safe"? How did she know I was pregnant? Why did she say I needed to listen? It was a regular Wednesday evening when my friend Sarah and I decided to visit Walmart. We didn't have anything special planned, just a usual trip to pick up some groceries and household items. I always enjoyed these little trips with Sarah. They were simple, no-pressure moments to unwind. But that night things were about to change. The evening was calm, with a gentle breeze and the faint smell of rain in the air. We drove to Walmart and parked in the far corner of the parking lot as we usually did, thinking it would be easier to leave later when we were done shopping. The lot was fairly quiet for a Wednesday evening, just a few cars scattered here and there. Nothing out of the ordinary. "We're early," I said, getting out of the car. Sarah nodded. "Yeah, it's nice though. No crowds to deal with." I smiled and we walked toward the store, chatting about everything and nothing. But as we passed the entrance, something caught my eye. A woman was standing off to the side of the parking lot, not moving. At first I didn't think much of it, but then I noticed how still she was. Her dark hair blew gently in the wind, but her body was rigid. She seemed almost frozen in place. "Do you see her?" I whispered to Sarah. She glanced over, then looked back at me. "Yeah, that's weird." I wasn't sure why I felt uneasy. The woman wasn't doing anything wrong, just standing there, almost as if she were waiting for something. But there was something off about it, something that didn't sit right with me. "Let's just get inside," I said, trying to shake off the feeling. We didn't think much more of it as we went about our shopping, picking up the usual items. But I couldn't stop glancing back toward the parking lot. That woman, her stillness, stuck with me. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. By the time we were ready to leave, it was just after 8 p.m. We headed back to the car, and that's when I saw her again. The woman was still standing in the same spot. It was as if time had stopped for her. I stopped walking, feeling a sudden unease. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut telling me something wasn't right. "Should we say something to her?" I asked, unsure of what to do. Sarah shrugged. "I don't know. She looks lost, I guess." We hesitated for a moment, but then I took a step forward, thinking it couldn't hurt to check on her. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide, almost too wide, as if she'd been staring at something for too long. She didn't speak right away. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You shouldn't be here. This parking lot, it's not what you think." I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" Her eyes never left mine. "You're being watched. It's not safe here." A chill ran down my spine. Her words didn't make sense, but something about the way she said them made me feel like I was on the verge of learning something important. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the parking lot. "Who was that?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet. "I don't know, but that was strange," I said, still trying to process what had just happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something important. We climbed into the car and I started the engine. But just as we were about to leave, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My heart skipped a beat. There she was, standing near the entrance, barely visible in the dim light. It was as though she had been watching us the whole time. "Do you see her?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah's eyes widened as she turned to look. "What the hell? She's still there." I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to stop and ask her more questions, but I was also terrified. Instead, I hit the gas and drove out of the parking lot, the unsettling feeling lingering in my chest. The drive back to Sarah's place was silent. Neither of us knew what to say. I kept thinking about the woman and her warning. It didn't make sense. But as we drove, I started to wonder. Had I imagined the whole thing? Had she just been some random woman? Or was there something more to it? When I got home that night, I tried to brush it off. But as I lay in bed, Her words kept echoing in my mind. "You're being watched." My heart pounded every time I thought about it. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman. I did some research online, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain what had happened. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I needed to make sense of the strange encounter. That's when I found it. A local news article from years ago caught my eye. It was about a woman who had died in a car accident in the Walmart parking lot. The article didn't have many details, but it mentioned that her death had been ruled an accident. However, there were rumors of something darker, something paranormal that had haunted the area ever since. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Could this be why the woman had warned me? Was it possible that she was connected to the past? Maybe she was trying to protect me, or maybe she was part of the tragedy that had occurred there. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit. I decided to go back to Walmart. This time, I wasn't just going to shop, I was going to find answers. That afternoon, I drove alone. Sarah didn't want to come. She was still freaked out from the night before, and honestly, I didn't blame her. But I had to know the truth. The parking lot was as quiet as it had been the first time, eerily quiet. It was a little past 5 p.m. and there were only a few cars scattered around. I parked in the same spot, just a few spaces away from where I had parked the night before. The air felt colder, as if the temperature had dropped. I walked toward the entrance of the store, eyes scanning the parking lot. There was no sign of the woman, at least not yet. I tried to ignore the feeling creeping up my chest, but it was hard. I felt like I was being watched. After picking up a few things, I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept drifting to the parking lot, searching for any sign of her. Maybe I was just imagining it. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. When I finally left the store, I stopped in my tracks. There she was, the same woman, standing in the same spot as before, near the far corner of the lot. Her face was pale, her eyes unblinking and intense. She was staring at me again, just as she had the night before. This time, I didn't wait for her to speak. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer right away. She slowly walked toward me, her footsteps almost silent on the asphalt. The parking lot seemed quieter, as if the world had stopped. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "You have to leave, now." "Why? What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I'm trying to protect you," she whispered. "This place, and it's cursed. You're being watched. If you stay, it will find you." "Who's watching me?" I demanded. "What do you mean it will find me?" But just like before, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to follow her, demand answers, but another part of me felt paralyzed, like I was being told to leave. Now I hurried to my car and drove away, but the unsettling feeling didn't leave. It felt like something was following me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. The next few days passed in a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman's words. I kept researching, hoping to find more information, but everything just led me in circles. Finally, I found another article. This one was older and more detailed. It mentioned the strange events that had happened in the parking lot over the years. Flickering lights, shadows moving on their own, voices when no one was around. But the most disturbing part was that Linda Evans's ghost was said to haunt the lot. People believed she was trying to protect others from whatever was still lurking there. I returned to Walmart one last time. This time, I was determined to uncover the truth. I parked in the same spot, my heart racing. I've worked the night shift at Walmart for 3 years now. Night shifts suit me. The quiet, the slow pace, it's all very predictable. On most nights, I grab my coffee, clock in at 10 p.m., and spend the hours restocking shelves while the janitors hummed their tunes and polished the floors. But something about that night felt wrong. It was December, just days before Christmas. The store had seen a rush earlier in the day, and toys were flying off the shelves faster than we could restock them. My supervisor, Mrs. Harris, asked me to focus on aisle 13, the toy section. "Aisle 13 needs restocking ASAP," she said as she handed me a clipboard. I hesitated. Aisle 13 always gave me the creeps. Maybe it was the rows of dolls with their unblinking eyes or the eerie silence that seemed to settle there. I couldn't explain it, but I never liked working in that aisle. Still, it was my job. I grabbed a cart loaded with boxes and headed toward the aisle. The first hour was uneventful. I unpacked box after box, placing Barbie dolls, action figures, and stuffed animals neatly on the shelves. Everything felt normal, until I noticed one particular doll. It had curly blonde hair, pale blue eyes, and a chipped smile. Unlike the others, it wasn't in its packaging. It was sitting upright on the shelf, staring directly at me. I frowned. "That's weird," I muttered to myself. I picked it up, examining it. It wasn't a toy I recognized from our inventory. Its dress was old-fashioned, like something from the 1950s. I placed it on the floor beside the cart, figuring I'd take it to the lost and found later. As I turned back to continue my work, a soft thud echoed behind me. I turned around, and there it was. The doll was back on the shelf, sitting upright, staring at me with that same chipped smile. My heart skipped a beat. "Okay, someone's messing with me," I said aloud, though the aisle was empty. I brushed it off as a prank. Maybe one of the other employees was bored and trying to spook me. But as the night went on, things got stranger. Every time I turned away, the doll seemed to move. First it was on the shelf. Then it was on the floor. Once, I found it perched on top of a box I hadn't even unpacked yet. "Very funny, guys," I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Silence. That's when I heard it, a faint giggle. It was soft, like a child's laughter, but it sent chills down my spine. I spun around, but the aisle was empty. The doll was now sitting at the end of the aisle, its head tilted slightly to one side. I grabbed my radio. "Hey, Mrs. Harris, is anyone else on the floor right now?" Her voice crackled through the static. "Nope, just you and the janitor." "Why?" I didn't answer. My hands were shaking as I shoved the doll into a box and pushed it aside. "Stay there," I muttered, as if talking to it would make a difference. By midnight, I was ready to call it quits. I'd finished unpacking most of the toys, but the eerie feeling wouldn't go away. I decided to head to the break room for some coffee. As I stepped away, I froze. On the floor, right where I'd left the doll, were words scrawled in red crayon. "Play with me." My breath hitched. I looked around, but no one was there. The aisle was empty except for the doll, which was now sitting upright in the middle of the writing. I backed away, nearly tripping over my own feet. This couldn't be real. It had to be a prank. Maybe someone was messing with me, but how? I grabbed my radio again. "Mrs. Harris, can you check the security cameras in aisle 13? There was a pause. "Cameras in aisle 13 aren't working tonight. Something's wrong with the feed." "Why, what's going on?" I didn't know how to answer. "Nothing, just thought I saw something." Determined to finish my shift, I returned to aisle 13. The words on the floor were gone and the doll was back on the shelf. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe I was overtired. But then the lights flickered. For a brief moment, the aisle was plunged into darkness. When the lights came back, the doll wasn't on the shelf anymore. It was standing. Not lying, not sitting. Standing as if balancing on its tiny legs. Its chipped smile seemed wider now, its eyes more lifelike. "Okay, that's enough," I whispered, my voice trembling. I reached out to grab it, but the moment my fingers brushed its dress, I felt a searing pain shoot through my hand. I yanked it back, staring in disbelief as a red welt formed on my palm, like I'd been burned. I didn't think. I ran. Boxes toppled over as I sprinted down the aisle, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I reached the break room. I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The janitor, an older man named Joe, looked up from his crossword puzzle. "You okay, kid?" "There's something in aisle 13, I stammered. He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Before I could explain, the lights in the break room flickered. A chill ran down my spine as a familiar sound echoed through the store, a soft, high-pitched giggle. Joe frowned. "You hear that?" I nodded, my eyes wide. He stood, grabbing his mop. "Stay here. I'll check it out." "No!" I grabbed his arm. "Don't go back there." But he shook me off. "Relax. It's probably just a loose speaker or something." I watched helplessly as he left the room. Minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Joe didn't come back. I couldn't leave him. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the darkened store. The aisles were eerily quiet, the only sound the faint buzz of the flickering lights. When I reached aisle 13, I stopped dead in my tracks. Joe was lying on the floor unconscious with the doll sitting on his chest. Its smile was gone, replaced by a gaping, toothy grin. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The doll turned its head toward me, its blue eyes locking onto mine. "Stay," it whispered. I don't remember much after that. Somehow I managed to grab Joe and drag him to safety. When the paramedics arrived, they said he'd had a heart attack. I didn't tell them about the doll. Who would believe me? I quit my job the next day. Sometimes I wonder if it was all just a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But then I remember the welt on my hand, the giggle that still haunts my nightmares, and the doll's lifeless eyes watching me as I walked out of the store for the last time. And I know it was real. Working the night shift at Walmart wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I'd been on the job for nearly 6 months, and by now, the routine had become second nature. The late night hours were quiet, almost too quiet sometimes. There were no crowds, just the occasional night owl or emergency shopper. I enjoyed the peace, though. Fewer people, less chaos. It was a cold November night, and I was in charge of monitoring the self-checkout stations. The parking lot outside was almost empty, save for a few cars scattered here and there. Most of the employees were in the back stocking shelves, leaving me alone up front. Around 1:45 a.m., a man walked in. He was average-looking, wearing a faded brown jacket and jeans. He didn't seem out of place, but something about the way he moved caught my attention. He walked slowly, almost cautiously, as if he were unsure about entering. "Good evening," I greeted him, but he didn't respond. He just nodded slightly and headed toward the aisles. Nothing unusual about that, I thought. People were often lost in their own worlds this late at night. But 20 minutes later, when I checked the store's cameras, I realized something odd. The man wasn't anywhere to be found. I frowned and rewound the footage. There he was, entering the store and walking toward aisle 5. But after that, nothing. He never came out of the aisle, never walked to the checkout, and never left the store. It was like he'd just vanished. I checked the aisle myself, expecting to find him browsing or crouched down looking at something on the lower shelves. But it was empty. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing faintly in the stillness. No answer. I told myself he must have left while I wasn't paying attention, maybe slipping out through an emergency exit. It wasn't unheard of for people to sneak out that way. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that crept up my spine. As the hours ticked by, I pushed the incident to the back of my mind. But then it happened again. It was around 3 a.m. when a young woman came in. She was wearing a hoodie and carrying a small tote bag. She smiled politely at me as she entered, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the floor. She moved quickly, heading straight for the health and beauty section. I didn't think much of it until 20 minutes passed and she hadn't come back up front. Curious, I checked the cameras again. My heart sank. Like the man earlier, she was there one moment and gone the next. The last footage showed her entering aisle 9, but she never came out. I hurried to the aisle, my hands trembling slightly. It was empty, just rows of shampoo bottles and soap bars, perfectly lined up. There was no sign of her. I checked every corner of the store, even the bathrooms, but it was like she disappeared into thin air. I radioed my supervisor, Greg, who was in the back unloading a shipment. "Hey Greg, can you check if anyone's hanging around the emergency exits? I think a couple of customers might have left without checking out." "Sure thing," Greg replied, though he sounded half asleep. 5 minutes later, he called back. "Nothing back here. You sure they didn't just walk out the front?" I didn't have an answer. By 4 a.m., I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The store felt different. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer, and the air had a strange heaviness to it, like the store itself was holding its breath. I went outside for a break, needing some fresh air. The parking lot was eerily silent. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of a nearby tree. That's when I noticed it. The cars in the lot. There were only 3 now. Earlier, there had been 5. I was sure of it. I remembered seeing a blue sedan parked near the entrance when I'd clocked in, but it was gone. The strange part? No one had left through the front doors. I turned back toward the store, and for a split second I thought I saw movement in the reflection of the glass doors, a shadow darting across the aisles. I froze, my pulse quickening. "It's just your imagination," I whispered to myself, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Back inside, the silence was deafening. I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched. The cameras didn't show anything unusual, but I couldn't shake the sensation. I decided to check the aisles one last time, even though I'd already done it twice. As I walked through the store, the fluorescent lights flickered above me, casting strange shadows on the floor. When I reached aisle 9, I stopped. The shelves weren't empty, but something was off. A faint, almost imperceptible humming sound filled the air, like a distant machine, and then I saw it. On the floor near the end of the aisle, a single sneaker. It was the same sneaker the young woman had been wearing. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was scuffed, as if it had been dragged across the floor. My breath came in short gasps as I scanned the area, but there was nothing else, no sign of her, no explanation. As I turned to leave, I felt it, a presence. It was subtle at first, just a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. But then the air grew colder, and I heard it. A faint whisper, so soft I could barely make out the words. "Help me." I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Help me." It was coming from the far end of the aisle, near the emergency exit. I stepped closer, my footsteps echoing on the tile floor. That's when I saw it. A shadowy figure standing just beyond the exit door. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching me. I bolted. Back in the break room, I locked the door behind me and tried to catch my breath. Greg found me a few minutes later, pale and shaken. "You okay, man?" he asked, his brow furrowed. I told him everything. The disappearing customers, the strange shadow, the whispering voice. To my surprise, he didn't look skeptical. Instead, he sighed heavily and said, "You're not the first to see it." My blood ran cold. Greg explained that for years there had been rumors about strange occurrences during the night shift. Customers vanishing, eerie shadows, and unexplained voices. The management never acknowledged it, but everyone who worked nights knew something was wrong with the store. "They say it's the land," Greg said quietly. This place was built on an old burial site. No one talks about it, but... He trailed off, his face pale. I wanted to quit right then and there, but my shift wasn't over. Against my better judgment, I went back to the floor, determined to finish my work. As I walked past aisle 9, I saw something that made my heart stop. A trail of footprints leading from the aisle to the emergency exit. The exit door was slightly ajar. Taking a deep breath, I followed the trail. The air grew colder with each step, and the whispering grew louder. Help me. Please. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but something compelled me to push it open. Outside, the parking lot was empty, save for one car, a rusted blue sedan parked near the edge of the lot. The whispers stopped. I approached the car slowly, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Inside, the seats were covered in dust, and a faint smell of decay filled the air. On the dashboard was a crumpled receipt from Walmart, dated 3 years ago. That's when I saw it in the rearview mirror, a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. I don't remember much after that. I quit the next day. To this day, I don't know what I saw or what happened to those customers. But sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers outside my window, faint and pleading. Help me, and I know it's not over. It was a typical Saturday night around 10 p.m. I had run out of a few household items and decided to make a quick trip to Walmart. The store is about 15 minutes from my house, so I usually stop by whenever I need something. That night, I didn't expect anything unusual, just another ordinary shopping trip. When I arrived, the parking lot was relatively full but not too crowded. I parked my car near the entrance and grabbed a cart. As I entered the store, the usual buzz of weekend shoppers filled the air as families and individuals moved from one aisle to the next. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I made my way to the grocery section first, picking up some milk and bread. I wasn't in a hurry, so I casually strolled through the aisles, grabbing whatever caught my eye. After about 10 minutes, I found myself in the cereal aisle. That's when I noticed something strange. At the far end of the aisle stood a woman. She was dressed in a faded black hoodie with the hood pulled up, covering most of her face. She stood there, still, staring at the shelves. Something about her posture felt off, like she wasn't really looking at the products, but just standing there watching. I brushed off the feeling, thinking she might just be taking her time to choose something. I continued down the aisle, moving toward her to grab a box of cereal. As I got closer, I noticed she wasn't looking at the shelves at all. She was standing there motionless, her head slightly turned toward me. Her face was hidden in the shadows of the hood, but I could feel her eyes on me. I stopped for a moment, unsure of what to do. Was she just being odd, or was there something else? A feeling of unease crept up my spine, and I quickly grabbed the cereal box, avoiding eye contact. As I turned to leave the aisle, I glanced back to see if she had moved. She hadn't. She was still standing there, staring in my direction. My heart skipped a beat, and I hurried out of the aisle, trying to shake off the weird encounter. I continued shopping, moving to the home goods section to pick up some cleaning supplies. The uneasy feeling hadn't left me, but I told myself I was being paranoid. It was probably just some weird shopper, nothing more. After grabbing the cleaning items, I headed to the back of the store where the electronics section was. I wanted to check out some headphones. As I browsed through the different brands, I caught a glimpse of someone standing at the end of the aisle. It was the woman in the black hoodie. She was still standing there, completely still, her head slightly tilted toward me. The same strange, unsettling feeling washed over me. I pretended not to notice her, trying to focus on the headphones in front of me, but my mind kept drifting back to her presence. I moved quickly, grabbing the first pair of headphones I saw and heading toward the checkout lanes. My stomach churned with anxiety as I walked faster. I kept telling myself she wasn't following me. There were plenty of people in the store, after all. It wasn't like I was alone. But as I made my way to the front of the store, I looked over my shoulder. There she was again, standing at the edge of the aisle near the cash registers. I froze for a second, trying to figure out if this was some sort of prank, but no one else seemed to notice her. She was just there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I quickly moved to the self-checkout section. My hands were shaking as I scanned my items, constantly glancing around to see if she had followed me, but she wasn't there anymore. The space behind me was clear, and the woman in the hoodie was nowhere to be seen. I felt a wave of relief as I finished scanning my items. Maybe she had left, or maybe it was just a strange coincidence. I paid for my things, grabbed my bags, and made my way toward the exit. As I pushed the cart out of the store and into the parking lot, I scanned the rows of cars. The moon was beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the pavement. My car was parked near the back, where it was a bit quieter. I walked briskly, eager to get home and put this unsettling experience behind me. But just as I approached my car, I saw her again. The woman in the black hoodie was standing beside my car, her back turned to me. My breath caught in my throat as I stopped in my tracks. How did she know which car was mine? Was she waiting for me? My mind raced with questions as I stood there, frozen. For a moment, I considered turning around and going back into the store to ask for help, but something about the way she was standing made me think she wasn't just another shopper. There was something more sinister about her presence. I took a deep breath and decided to approach. As I moved closer, she didn't budge. She just stood there, still as a statue. I gripped my car keys tightly, ready to unlock the door and jump in if she made any sudden movements. When I got within a few feet of her, she slowly turned to face me. Her face was pale, almost sickly white, with deep, hollow eyes that stared straight into mine. Her lips were cracked, and her expression was blank, emotionless. I froze, unable to look away. For what felt like an eternity, we stood there, locked in a silent stare. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the blood rushing to my ears. I didn't know what to do. Run, scream, ask her what she wanted. Before I could make a decision, she stepped closer, her cold, lifeless eyes never leaving mine. My instincts kicked in, and I quickly sidestepped her, unlocking my car and jumping inside. I slammed the door shut, locking it immediately. Through the window, I watched as she stood there unmoving, just inches from the car. Her face was still blank, her eyes still fixed on me. I fumbled for the ignition, my hand shaking as I started the engine. Without looking back, I pulled out of the parking lot and sped away, my heart racing. As I drove home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see her sitting in the back seat. But she was gone. To this day, I don't know who or what that woman was, but I haven't been back to that Walmart since. And every time I park my car, I make sure to check the shadows around me. When I was 20, I started working at a 24-hour Walmart in a small, sleepy town. It was a straightforward job, stocking shelves, helping customers, and closing the store. Most of the time, I worked the night shift, which meant I was usually alone from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. One night, as I was restocking the snack aisle, a strange man walked in. He was tall, with a scruffy beard, and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His eyes had a wild look, and he moved with an unsettling, jittery energy. He didn't seem to be shopping. He just wandered the aisles slowly, occasionally glancing at me. I tried to ignore him and focused on my work, but he kept appearing in my peripheral vision, moving closer and closer. After a while, he stopped right beside me, his presence looming over me. I looked up, trying to force a smile. "Can I help you find anything?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he just stared at me with a vacant expression. A chill ran down my spine. I turned back to my work, and after a few minutes, he disappeared into the store. I thought nothing more of it, and continued stocking the shelves. A few nights later, the same man appeared again. This time he was holding a small, old-fashioned lantern. He carried it through the store, its flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. I watched him from a distance, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. He wandered aimlessly until he reached the toy section, where he began to inspect the items with obsessive curiosity. That night, I noticed something strange. As I moved to the back of the store to get more stock, I heard a faint whispering coming from the toy section. It was too soft to make out, but it sent shivers down my spine. I quickened my pace and hurried back to the front, trying to focus on my tasks, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Weeks went by with no sign of the man. I began to think he had moved on, but one evening, while I was finishing up my shift, he returned. This time, he was carrying a large, heavy-looking sack. He placed it on the floor near the checkout counters and began rummaging through it. I watched from behind the registers, my anxiety rising. The sack seemed to contain various odd items, strange trinkets, old photographs, and what looked like scraps of old newspaper. He noticed me watching and smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was more of a twisted grin. He beckoned me over with a crooked finger. Reluctantly, I approached him, trying to hide my fear. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Just organizing my collection," he replied in a low, raspy voice. "Do you want to see?" Before I could answer, he began pulling out items from the sack. The first was a faded photograph of a young girl. The next was a tattered diary with handwritten notes about strange dreams and voices. As he continued, I noticed a disturbing pattern. Each item seemed connected to someone who had disappeared from the town over the years. My heart raced. "I need to call the manager," I said, backing away. "No need for that," he said, his grin widening. "I'm just sharing my stories with you." He continued to pull out items, each one more disturbing than the last. At the bottom of the sack was an old rusty key. He held it up, letting it dangle between his fingers. "This is special," he said. "It opens a door to a place you'd never believe." His words sent a jolt of fear through me. I backed away, my hands shaking. "Please leave," I said firmly. "I'm calling the police." He looked disappointed but slowly gathered his things and left, taking his sack with him. I immediately called my manager and reported the incident. He seemed concerned but didn't take it too seriously, assuring me that the man was probably harmless and promising to keep an eye out. The next night, as I was restocking the shelves, I noticed that the store seemed eerily quiet. It was almost as if the usual hum of the air conditioning and the faint sounds of the outside world had disappeared. I tried to focus on my work, but my nerves were on edge. Suddenly I heard a loud bang coming from the back storage room. My heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate. The storage room was empty, but the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and saw that the room had been ransacked. Boxes were scattered everywhere, and the sack from the night before lay in the middle of the room. I picked up the sack cautiously and opened it. Inside, instead of the strange items from before, there was a new item, a hand-drawn map of the store. The map had strange symbols and markings all over it, indicating different sections of the store and a large X in the middle of the employees' break room. A surge of panic washed over me. Taking a deep breath, I decided to check the break room. When I entered, the room looked completely normal, except for a small, locked door that I had never noticed before. The key from the sack fit perfectly into the lock. With trembling hands, I turned it and the door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the depths of the store. The air was thick with dust and a faint, musty smell. I shone my flashlight down the stairs, but the darkness swallowed the light almost immediately. Without thinking, I turned and ran back to the front of the store, my heart pounding. I called the police once more, reporting the entire situation and emphasizing the locked door and the mysterious staircase. The police arrived and searched the area but found nothing unusual. They dismissed it as a prank and advised me to take precautions. Feeling defeated and scared, I decided to quit my job a few days later. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, and the thought of the mysterious staircase haunted me. I moved to a different town, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. But sometimes late at night I still think about that dark staircase and wonder what secrets it holds. I had always thought of Walmart as a safe place, After all, it was open 24/7, and even during the graveyard shift, there were always employees around. But after what happened to me one fateful night, that illusion shattered forever. It was a few years ago during the winter. I was working the night shift at a small tech company in the middle of nowhere. My job was routine, nothing fancy, mostly data entry and filing reports. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. I had finished my tasks early that night, so I figured I'd head out to Walmart to grab some groceries and maybe a few Christmas presents. It was close to 3 a.m. when I pulled into the parking lot. The air was crisp and cold, and frost covered the windshields of the few cars parked outside. I tightened my jacket and hurried inside. The store was mostly empty, as you'd expect at that hour. A couple of late-night shoppers browsed the aisles, and a single cashier stood at her register, scrolling through her phone. I grabbed a cart and made my way to the grocery section, figuring I'd get some basics first before heading to the electronics aisle to pick up a gift for my nephew. As I wandered down the frozen foods aisle, I noticed something strange. A man, tall and gaunt, was standing at the end of the aisle, staring directly at me. His face was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes were dark, sunken pits. He was dressed in a thick winter coat, much too heavy for the mild weather outside. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I quickly brushed it off. People come in all shapes and sizes after all. Maybe he was just cold-natured. I continued shopping, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up my neck. But every time I glanced over my shoulder, I saw him. He wasn't always in the same place, but he was never far. Sometimes he stood at the end of an aisle, sometimes near the shelves, but he always seemed to be watching me, his dark eyes never leaving my figure. I decided to speed up my shopping, suddenly feeling the urge to leave as soon as possible. I made my way to the electronics section and grabbed a game console for my nephew. As I turned to head back to the front of the store, I saw two more men, both dressed similarly in heavy winter coats, standing near the toy section. They too were watching me. My heart started to race. Something was definitely wrong. The way they stood, their pale faces and hollow eyes, their eerie stillness, it all felt unnatural. I pushed my cart toward the checkout, my eyes darting between the three men, hoping they wouldn't follow. But as I passed them, I saw all three slowly begin to move, trailing me from a distance. I reached the front of the store and quickly unloaded my cart onto the conveyor belt. The cashier, a young woman in her early 20s, barely looked up from her phone as she scanned my items. I wanted to say something, ask for help, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to sound paranoid, and besides, what could she do? They hadn't done anything yet. "Is everything okay?" the cashier finally asked, glancing up as she bagged my groceries. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just in a hurry." I paid for my things and quickly grabbed my bags. The men were still there, lingering by the entrance, their eyes locked on me. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should ask the cashier to call security, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I took a deep breath and headed for the exit. As soon as I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. The parking lot was eerily quiet, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows on the ground. My car was parked near the far end of the lot, away from the other vehicles. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder, and sure enough, the men were following me, their movements slow but deliberate. I reached my car and fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking with fear. I could hear footsteps behind me, getting closer. Panic surged through me as I finally unlocked the door and threw my bags into the back seat. Just as I was about to climb in, I felt a hand grabbing my shoulder. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. It was one of the men, his face inches from mine. His breath was cold, his eyes dark and empty, like the void itself. He smiled, a slow, sinister smile that sent a wave of terror through me. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. I didn't respond. Instead, I yanked my arm free and scrambled into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it just as the other two men reached my car. They surrounded the vehicle, their pale faces pressed against the windows, their breath fogging the glass. I started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The men didn't move. They just stood there, watching me, their eyes cold and unblinking. With a screech of tires, I backed out of the parking spot and sped out of the lot, my heart racing. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw them standing in the middle of the parking lot, watching me disappear into the night. For the next few miles, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see their faces again, but the road behind me remained empty. Still, the fear lingered. I couldn't shake the image of those men, their cold, dark eyes staring into my soul. When I finally reached home, I parked my car in the driveway and sat there for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. My hands were still trembling as I reached for my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, my phone buzzed. A text message appeared on the screen from an unknown number. "You can't run forever." My blood ran cold. I looked around, but the street was empty. There was no sign of anyone, no footsteps, no shadows. But somehow I knew they were watching. Somehow they knew where I lived. That night I barely slept. Every noise, every creak of the house made me jump. I kept the lights on, the doors locked, but it didn't help. The feeling of being watched never left. For weeks I lived in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, always expecting to see those men again, but they never appeared. It was as if they had vanished, leaving only the memory of that terrifying night to haunt me. Months later, I was watching the news when a report caught my attention. The police had arrested a group of men suspected of stalking and harassing women in the area. They showed their photos on the screen, and my heart stopped. It was them, the 3 men from Walmart. The police said they had been living in an abandoned house on the outskirts of town, watching their victims, waiting for the right moment to strike. But what disturbed me the most was the revelation that they hadn't been alone. There were others, men just like them, still out there, watching, waiting. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that they're still watching. Every time I step outside at night, every time I walk through a parking lot, I can feel their eyes on me. Because once they've chosen you, once they've marked you, they never truly leave. And no matter how far you run, no matter where you hide, they will always find you. It was just another late-night grocery run. I'd had a grueling day at work and was exhausted, but I needed to pick up a few essentials. Walmart was my only option at that hour, and as usual, it was eerily quiet, with only the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights filling the silence. The store was almost empty, save for a few scattered shoppers and the occasional employee restocking shelves. I wandered through the aisles, picking up the items I needed, when I noticed something odd. At the end of the electronics aisle, I saw a woman standing alone. She was dressed in a long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured most of her face. At first glance, she seemed out of place, but I didn't think much of it and continued browsing. As I reached the next aisle, I saw her again, standing at the far end, still motionless. Her presence was unsettling, but I tried to ignore it and focused on my shopping. I picked up a few more items and moved to the grocery section. To my surprise, she was there again, standing near the cereal boxes, staring at nothing in particular. Her stillness and the way she seemed to appear in every aisle made me feel uneasy. I tried to shake off the discomfort by telling myself it was just a coincidence, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing moment. I decided to head to the checkout to get out of the store as quickly as possible. As I walked toward the front, I noticed her once more, this time by the snack aisle, still in the same position, her face hidden under the brim of her hat. The checkout line was unusually slow, and as I waited, I glanced around the store, half expecting to see her lurking in the background. To my relief, she was nowhere in sight. Maybe she had left. I let out a sigh of relief and focused on the cashier, trying to ignore the creeping feeling of dread that still lingered. Just as I was about to pay, the lights flickered momentarily, casting eerie shadows across the store. I glanced up and saw her, standing behind me in the line, still as a statue, her face concealed by the hat. My heart skipped a beat and I turned quickly to the cashier, handing over my money with shaking hands. I glanced back to see if she was still there, and sure enough, she was, standing only a few feet away. I hurried to grab my bags and left the store as quickly as I could, not daring to look back. The cool night air hit my face as I reached my car and locked the doors immediately, my heart pounding. As I drove home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced that she was following me. Each time I glanced back, I expected to see her dark figure in the distance, but there was nothing. I tried to shake off the paranoia, but the image of her standing in the checkout line kept replaying in my mind. The next day, I decided to visit Walmart again, hoping to find some explanation for the strange encounter. I entered the store during the day, hoping to see if the woman was a regular customer or if there was some reasonable explanation. I asked a few employees if they had seen anyone unusual the previous night, but they all looked at me with confusion. I decided to check the security footage from that night. After some convincing, the store manager agreed to let me review the tapes. I watched the footage from the electronics aisle, through the grocery section, and finally to the checkout. The footage showed me walking through the store, but there was no sign of the woman in any of the clips. A chill ran down my spine. I insisted on watching the footage from the store's cameras again, but still, there was no trace of her. The manager was puzzled and assured me that the security system was functioning properly. I left the store feeling even more disturbed. What had I really seen? Was it my imagination playing tricks on me? Or was there something more sinister at play? I avoided Walmart for weeks after that. The sight of the store triggered the same unsettling feelings, and I couldn't bring myself to return. The encounter with the mysterious woman became a haunting memory that I couldn't quite explain. Every time I thought about that night, the same chilling sense of being watched would return, leaving me with more questions than answers. Despite my best efforts to rationalize the experience, the memory of her still lingers. Sometimes when I'm out shopping late at night, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see her dark figure lurking in the shadows. The store that was once a place of convenience has become a reminder of that night, and I can't help but shiver at the thought of what might have been. In the end, some questions are better left unanswered, and some encounters are best left as unsettling memories. I have come to accept that I may never understand the true nature of that night or the mysterious woman who appeared in the aisles of Walmart. All I know is that it was an experience that left a lasting impression and a sense of dread that still lingers every time I walk into a store after dark. It was a typical Wednesday night, and I found myself heading to Walmart again. Living in a small town where the main attraction was this 24/7 store, Walmart often became a last-minute stop for things I'd forgotten during the day. My husband Jake was working the night shift at the factory, leaving me to handle our 2-year-old son alone. That night, I needed diapers, the kind you only realize are gone when it's 11 p.m., and your child is already asleep, blissfully unaware of the impending chaos. Walmart at night was a different world. During the day, it buzzed with shoppers, families, and the elderly. But as the clock approached midnight, the atmosphere changed. The fluorescent lights felt harsher, casting long shadows in empty aisles, and the once busy store seemed eerily quiet, save for the occasional sound of shopping carts creaking or muffled conversations near the self-checkout. The only people left were those with nowhere else to be, the night wanderers and the occasional late-night stalker. As I parked my car and stepped inside, a gust of cool air hit my face. I nodded at the bored-looking greeter and grabbed a cart, my mind set on getting diapers and heading straight home. But a nagging thought about grabbing a snack crossed my mind. Maybe just a quick stop in the snack aisle. I maneuvered my cart down the aisles, starting in the baby section. As I scanned the shelves for diapers, I heard footsteps approaching behind me. Instinctively, I glanced over my shoulder. A man, maybe in his late 40s, was walking toward me. He wasn't doing anything particularly strange, but something about his appearance unsettled me. He was tall, with disheveled hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't seen a washing machine in days. He seemed out of place, like he didn't belong here. He wasn't carrying a cart or basket, just slowly wandering, his eyes lingering on the shelves, but more on me. I shrugged it off and grabbed the diapers, deciding it was time to get moving. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I was tired, right? But as I turned to leave the aisle, there he was, standing at the other end, blocking my path. He was staring directly at me now, his lips curled into a thin, unsettling smile. I felt my heart skip a beat. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed me with a slight tremble. He didn't reply. Instead, he continued smiling, his eyes locked on mine. I gripped the handle of my cart tighter and forced myself to walk forward, hoping he would step aside. Just as I approached him, he turned and walked away without a word, disappearing into the next aisle. A wave of relief washed over me. Maybe he was just a harmless weirdo. That was normal for Walmart at night, right? I decided to cut my shopping trip short and headed straight for the checkout. As I walked, the store felt even quieter than before. The aisles were deserted, and the overhead speakers played some soft, unrecognizable tune. I tried to shake the feeling of unease creeping up my spine. The sooner I got out, the better. I rounded a corner and stopped dead in my tracks. The man was there again, this time in the electronics aisle. He was standing by the TVs pretending to browse, but I knew he wasn't interested in any of them. His eyes were once again fixed on me. My palms grew sweaty, and a pit formed in my stomach. I quickly turned around and headed in the opposite direction. But as I pushed my cart, I could hear faint footsteps trailing me from behind. Panic surged through me. I picked up my pace, nearly breaking into a jog as I made my way to the front of the store. My heart pounded in my chest as the checkout lines came into view. I saw a young cashier, the only one working at this hour, and hurried toward her. "Is everything okay?" she asked, noticing the panic on my face as I began placing the diapers and a few snacks onto the counter. "Yeah," I mumbled, glancing over my shoulder. The man was nowhere in sight. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe he'd left. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. The cashier rang up my items and I fumbled with my wallet, my hands shaking as she bagged the diapers. I felt a presence behind me again. My stomach dropped. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Excuse me, ma'am," a deep voice said from behind me. I froze. The cashier looked just as startled as I was. But before I could say anything, the man stepped closer. "You dropped this," he said, holding out a piece of paper. I glanced at the paper and back at him. It was just a receipt, one that definitely wasn't mine. My mind raced as I searched for the right words, but before I could respond, the man leaned in, his breath hot on my neck. "You shouldn't shop alone at night," he whispered. "You never know who's out there." My body went cold. The cashier's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there as shocked as I was. I grabbed my bags without saying a word and bolted for the exit. The automatic doors slid open as I rushed to my car, throwing my bags into the back seat and locking the doors as fast as I could. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands trembling as I fumbled to start the engine. I could see the man standing just outside the store, watching me. His grin was wider now, almost predatory. My breath came in short gasps as I finally turned the key and reversed out of the parking spot. As I drove away, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following me, but the parking lot remained empty, save for a few parked cars and the faint glow of the Walmart sign behind me. I sped home, my heart still racing. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I locked the doors and ran inside, feeling the safety of my home wash over me. I collapsed onto the couch, trying to calm my nerves. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow in my house felt like him, lurking, waiting. I knew it was irrational, but the fear had taken hold. Even the next day, the memory of his smile haunted me. I haven't been back to that Walmart since. Now every time I hear footsteps behind me in a store, I can't help but look over my shoulder. afraid that one day the lurker from aisle 14 will return. A year ago, I worked at a local supermarket, one of those places that stays open all night, catering to late shoppers and night owls. I had been there for about 8 months, mostly working the graveyard shift, stocking shelves and organizing the aisles. My shift typically started at 10 p.m. while the store was still open, but usually emptying out by then. It was eerily quiet, with only a few scattered shoppers milling about, grabbing last-minute items. One night, I was assigned to the grocery section, working the far end of the store where the shelves seemed to stretch endlessly. I was alone, with no other employees or customers in sight. The stillness of the store wrapped around me, amplifying the sound of every small noise. As I stocked cans on the lower shelves, I heard the faint shuffling of footsteps. Glancing up, I noticed a man at the far end of the aisle. Something about him immediately set off alarms in my head. He was tall, dressed in an oversized black jacket and wearing a ski mask. It wasn't the coldest time of the year, so it didn't make sense. What was even more peculiar was that the mask still had its price tag attached. Clearly, it was something he had grabbed from one of the store's shelves. For a few seconds, we locked eyes. I felt a twinge of unease. The way he stood there, just staring, was unnerving. I quickly looked back at the cans I was stacking, trying to ignore the odd feeling creeping over me. But I could feel him still standing there, his gaze fixed on me. Seconds passed, maybe even a full minute, and he hadn't moved. The silence between us was unbearable. Then, to my discomfort, he began walking toward me, his footsteps echoing ominously in the empty aisle. He stopped a few feet away and, in a strangely calm voice, asked if I could show him where the beans were. There was something chilling about the request given how bizarre the situation already was. But I kept my composure, nodded, and told him I'd show him. Without a word, he followed me as I led him 3 aisles over to where we kept the beans. "This is the aisle," I said, motioning to the rows of cans. "We've got all sorts here. Baked beans, green beans, kidney beans." He gave a simple, almost robotic, "Thank you," and walked into the aisle to examine the products. I quickly left, returning to my work, but the image of him in that ski mask lingered in my mind. The rest of the night passed without incident. The store closed shortly after that strange interaction, and I assumed the man had left as well. I didn't see him again for the remainder of my shift. By the time I clocked out and drove home, the whole thing was nothing more than a weird, forgettable moment. Or so I thought. I returned to my apartment, feeling the usual exhaustion that comes with working overnight shifts. I collapsed into bed, expecting to sleep through the morning and wake up feeling refreshed. When I finally did wake up, it was mid-afternoon. Groggy, I decided I was hungry and needed something to eat. I pulled on some clothes and headed for the door, but as I opened it, something unexpected stopped me in my tracks. Right in front of my apartment door was a pile of beans, cans of baked beans, green beans, kidney beans, and bags of dry beans, all sitting there like some twisted offering. My heart skipped a beat. I immediately thought of the man in the ski mask from the night before. Was it him? Was this some kind of joke? I crouched down, inspecting the cans. They were the exact brands we stocked at the supermarket. My mind raced. How could this guy know where I lived? I had never seen him before in my life. The rational side of me tried to brush it off as a prank, maybe one of my friends messing with me or even a coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. I contacted a few friends, recounting the bizarre series of events, hoping one of them would confess to pulling a prank. None of them did. In fact, they were just as creeped out as I was when I told them about the man in the ski mask and the pile of beans. For days, I felt uneasy, like I was being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man knew where I lived, that he had followed me home. I never saw him again, but the memory of that night and the beans still haunts me. Was it just a prank, or was there something more sinister going on? I may never know. But one thing's for sure, I haven't been able to look at a can of beans the same way since. I briefly worked as a cashier at Walmart a few years ago. I was there for roughly 3 months, working largely afternoon and nighttime shifts, and was only employed part-time. I was in my early 20s at the time, and still learning how to work in retail. To be honest, it wasn't that horrible for my second job. Usually my shifts lasted 4 to 8 hours, during which I would scan products, speak with customers, and do other tasks. I remember one night in particular quite clearly. At first the evening was rather boring, but it soon became one of the most unsettling events of my life. That evening I worked my regular shift at the check lanes from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. When my shift started, the store was quite busy, but as the evening wore on, things started to slow down. Although you occasionally get an unpleasant or strange person, the majority of the people that went through my line were kind. To pass the time, I always made an effort to be courteous and engage in small talk. I had a strange experience about an hour into my shift, which I dismissed at the moment, but would come to regret. A man carrying only a few things came into my checkout lane. He was of normal height, perhaps a bit taller than me, around 5 feet 8 inches, since I'm only 5 feet 3 inches. It wasn't unusual for people to tower over me, so there was nothing particularly noteworthy about him. He wore a basic t-shirt, baggy shorts, and had short, chopped dark hair. As I was scanning his items, he glanced at me and asked nonchalantly, "What time do you get off work?" I didn't give the question much thought at first. It felt like just another casual remark, as people often made small conversation. I replied, 9 o'clock, without much thought, and smiled politely, thinking that would be the end of the conversation. But then, with a strange, unnerving smile, he murmured, "See you then," in a way that made me uneasy. At the moment, I believed it to be a simple joke, and he left with his belongings. I ignored the strange sensation his remarks had left behind and continued working. I assumed he was just playing around, especially since there were still a lot of people to check out. After several hours, I had almost forgotten about the odd man. As closing time drew closer, the store was considerably quieter, and I was eager to get home. I happened to look up while I was scanning products for another customer and saw the man strolling past my register once more. Even though he had nothing in his hands, he appeared to be entering the store. This time, he grinned as he passed my register and remarked, "Just a few more minutes, right?" I glanced at the clock. It was 8:55. I was momentarily perplexed. How was he aware that my shift was coming to an end? I forced a smile and said, "Yeah, almost done." But I felt a little uneasy. I turned back to my customer, trying to shake off the strange feeling the man had left behind when he walked off without making a purchase. I was relieved he wasn't lingering near my register anymore. Finally, my shift came to a close. It was 9 p.m., and I was worn out. I gathered my belongings and made my way to the exit after clocking out, eager to put the odd experience behind me. My car was parked close to the far end of the dimly lit parking lot because the lot had been packed when I arrived for work. After I'd only walked a few feet, a tiny red car suddenly pulled up directly in front of me. I looked up in surprise, only to realize that the man from earlier was driving. My heart skipped a beat as he rolled down the window and said, "Get in." At that moment, I knew this wasn't a harmless prank. I hurriedly told him, "No, I can't," and began walking around the rear of his car. He started to back up, trying to block my path. "Come on, get in the car," he said again, and panic set in as I realized this was more serious than I had initially thought. I ran without thinking. I sprinted as quickly as I could toward my car, but the man followed. He drove after me slowly, keeping a close eye on me. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my keys, desperate to get to my car before he could catch up. He parked in the spot next to mine, but I managed to unlock my car door and slip inside. My hands were shaking as I locked the doors. He rolled down his window again, trying to talk to me, but I couldn't hear him over my own fear. Out of desperation, I texted a co-worker, who was still inside the store, asking them to get the manager and explain what was happening. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, too terrified to drive away, fearing he would follow me home. Fortunately, my store manager came out into the parking lot and approached the man's car. The manager threatened to call the police when the man refused to explain what he was doing. Finally, the man drove off. Even after he left, I sat in my car, trying to calm down before I pulled out of the parking lot and headed home. I kept thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't run to my car or if my manager hadn't come to my aid. I worked at Walmart for another month after that, but I never saw the man again. I'm grateful that my manager and coworker were there to support me, even though I still don't know what the man's intentions were. The thought of what could have happened if he had followed me home that night still haunts me. In retrospect, the experience was strange and terrifying. It's a constant reminder to trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right. Even though I've moved on from that work, I can't help but think about that night, because it serves as a terrifying reminder of how easily an apparently routine shift may devolve into something much darker.